Test, test. Can you hear me? Does he hear? Test, test. Test, test.
I can hear you. You probably need to be, once everybody stops talking.
Okay. You might need to turn it up.
Yeah, I was saying, if you
You still got 5 minutes. I realize afterwards we're going to hear some.
Well, I can't.
I know, you can't fix it now.
We had it working last night,
Well,
and we stayed late,
I know, I saw you know. I know.
so I don't know what to say.
No, we'll get those folks to, all right, I'm going to get it going. Maybe we start walking up there so people start being quiet. Is this working? Can you hear me, Christy? Good morning. Is this on? Good morning, folks. Welcome. If I could have your attention, want to get started on time. Thank you, thank you. I'm sure we're not clapping for me, but thank you for the attention. Oh, okay. Thank you. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ed DiNardo. I'm the Vice President on the Board of Directors. And I just wanted to say a few words to kick off this meeting. Just so you know, the meeting's also being streamed, but we're having a few issues for those of you who may be watching this live. The slides are not showing up on the stream as we anticipated, so you'll be able to hear us, but you'll only be able to see the slides from a distance. If you wish, the slides will be sent out after the meeting, and at that point, if you prefer, you can listen to the presentation and see the slides on your computer at home, perhaps a little easier. But like I say, you'll be able to hear us. You're going to have a little issue with seeing the slides that the different speakers are speaking to at that point. So we apologize for that, but it's one of those technical goblins that showed up at the last moment. So, to get started, for those of you who have been here for a while, you know it's just 1 year shy of when we presented the strategic plan to the community, and a big kickoff that we had, and we informed you of all the work that your groups had done before over the past year to get us to this point. And we were very pleased with what came out of that presentation and the community participation and interest in what we had presented. Over the last almost, 9 months now, there's been a lot of work, practically a year actually. There's been a lot of work since the strategic plan was approved in September to actually implement what was developed. And so you'll see a lot of names up there of your friends and neighbors that have been hard at work over that past year to make this come to fruition. And it hasn't been always easy, but they've been dedicated, and we do appreciate all their efforts. I also want to recognize Mr. Dawson, the board at the time, for coming up with the idea of a strategic plan, right? To make sure that our community stays vibrant. That's the whole genesis of this, is we want to be a top-tier community in the state of Georgia and across the country, for that matter. So that when you think of Deaton Creek, you're proud to say, I live in the village of Deaton Creek. Because we know you all take your villagers on your travels, right? So we want that recognition. I also want to point out a special individual who contributed a lot of time and talent to this effort. So for those of you not familiar, to develop a strategic plan, I did a little research. You can spend $300 to $500 an hour to hire a consultant, and the rough estimate is that you can spend $70,000 plus to develop a strategic plan. Ours cost us $0. And that's thanks to Dave Basarab. Dave, if you wouldn't mind standing. Thank you. He contributed his knowledge and his intellectual capital to help us work through that process over that past year. And that just shows us how many talented people are in this community. So we appreciate when folks step forward and bring that kind of talent to the community, and we can achieve great things through that, because many of you have great life experiences. So keep that in mind when we come knocking on your door in the future. One more piece of interesting information. I also checked, and it says, do you recognize that greater than 67% of strategic plans fail? So I read that and I said, wow, that's not good. But you know what? Ours isn't failing. We've been moving forward in all 7 pillars. All the leaders of those pillars have been making things happen. They're going to introduce you to those things that are coming forward over now that they've already accomplished and that they'll accomplish in the future. So you'll see a lot of results that have been occurring, and we're only 1 year into it, and we still have a little ways to go. So I think we owe all those folks a big round of applause for making this to this point. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Mr. Doss, who will get us started with the presentation. Okay.
Thanks, Ed. Next slide, please. By way of background, you've all seen this slide multiple times, but the life cycle of a community, it goes from startup to rapid growth and then maturity, which is where we are now, and then starts declining. And it either declines and dies, or it is reborn because of something we do, like strategic planning. So next slide, please. This slide shows when we started. We started in January of 2002. 2022. Just between you and me, I wish it were 2002. I'd be a lot lighter and a lot hardier. And you can see how we went through defining the elements. We went through SWOT, which was strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Thank you. And then we developed an initial list of projects. There was a big list. They were all over the wall here. We drafted a plan. We prioritized the projects. We did cost-benefit analysis. And we created a communication plan and the materials. And then in August of last year, we brought it forth to the community and gathered feedback from all of you. And then we finalized the plan and began implementation. Next slide, please. There were 6 pillars developed. And each one, there's no sense in reading each one because you'll hear about each one here in a few minutes. But these pillars were developed to improve and enhance the community. And from the standpoint of financing, these pillars were developed outside of our normal financing process. In other words, these are things that are not included in our budget. And we'll get more on that as we go forward. Next slide, please. Following the meeting, we sent out a survey to all residents. And in the survey, you residents overwhelmingly approved of the plan, approved of going forward, approved of spending money on the plan. You can see we were over 70% either strongly agreeing or agreeing. I think it was between 74 and 78%. Some of you were neutral, and between 2 and 4% of you said, you're off base, don't do it. So we went forward. And I'm going to ask Ed to come back up now and introduce each presenter, each of the 6 presenters. And we'll present where we are with each pillar. And then we'll take questions and answers. And following that, I'm going to have Jim come up and do the financing part of the system. In other words, Jim will explain where we're going to have to get the money. So, Ed?
Thank you. So first we have the communication excellence pillar. That pillar was led by Dick Ramsdale, and he'll come up and introduce his team and what they've accomplished over the past year. Dick?
Good morning to everyone. The people that you see listed here have spent a considerable number of hours over the last 9 to 12 months with this pillar. Some of them are members of the Communications Committee, which has other responsibilities also, and then some of them are people who have volunteered to just participate in the pillar. You see Steve and Mary Lou Goring up there, and they were kind enough to not only participate in all the things they already do, but to be on the pillar. Kathy Koch and Diane Champa assisted us, and the rest of the names on there in one way or another were associated with the Communications Committee. Ideally, you recognize all those names. If any of you are sitting out there, would you stand up and identify yourself for the folks? There's. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. This is the assignment that we had, and it was a very challenging assignment, frankly, because if you read those objectives, you say, okay, how on earth am I going to satisfy those objectives? And it was very challenging to come up with an approach that would take care of that. But we have done quite a bit of implementation already on a number of these things, and we'll talk about what those things are. So next slide, please. The collaboration, which was the 4th initiative there between the HOA board and the Villas board, has moved along very, very nicely, got implemented rather quickly. The Villas is now engaging CMA as their management group also. So everything that is being done is being coordinated between the HOA board and the Villas. It's rather interesting. I didn't know until we actually, just before we started all this, learned that the Villas was a separate activity from the HOA board. And I'm not sure how many of you even know that until I'm telling you now. But that was something that occurred when Pulte turned the community over to the residents, and the Villas operated separately from the HOA board. That is no longer the case, really. The Villas does some things differently, but from a day-to-day activity point of view, everything is being done in a coordination now. So that has happened. The other things that you see there are the approach that we took, and we decided to focus a subgroup of our project team on each initiative. So we had 3 or 4 people working on each initiative, and just a few weeks ago, about a month ago, we submitted a written report to the board with recommendations that will go beyond some of the things that we've done already. And we're awaiting feedback from the board as to which things we should continue with, which things we should initiate, and which things perhaps are not appropriate at the present time. Next slide, please. You'll see a list on these next 2 slides of some of the things that we've accomplished. We launched online event registration, and we also have launched online payments. Ideally, folks have enjoyed that. And the main objective of the whole initiative, obviously, is to have better communication overall, but to also just make processes and procedures a little more efficient. And the primary objective is to have available to all of us the answers to the questions that you would typically have and the information that you would like to know as time goes forward. So we've also established a PR subcommittee. The PR subcommittee's focus is to just get information to people on what's going on around us, both inside and outside. And ideally, some of you have seen some of those articles already about some of the developments, and we're going to continue those activities too. Website is a big activity. I want to specifically recognize here the subcommittee that we have of the CCC, that is the website subcommittee. They're doing a significant amount of work under the leadership of Tamara Kirch, and I'd like to specifically mention Tamara because she's spent a lot of time. One of the things that hasn't been going on is lots of regular communication and coordination between the committees, and so we're recommending that there be more formal interaction between the committees and have quarterly meetings of at a minimum, the committee leaders, so that the P&G and the ARC and the CCC and all the other acronyms that we've got get together every once in a while and coordinate activities. And one of the things that is a continuing challenge is guidelines for how to communicate what we're planning to communicate. We get some regular feedback that, you know, something's too long, something's too short. Why did you put that where it went? I didn't need to know that. These kinds of things. And so we're trying to come up with better guidelines on how long articles should be, how often they should appear, whether the daily should actually be a daily, or whether it should be a semi-daily or a weekly. And so we're going to evaluate those things as we go forward further too, but have templates that say here's how long those various things should be. Next slide, please. One of the things that was mentioned is that we have an awful lot of data now that we need to analyze a little more effectively. And so we're going to do that, particularly the ARC data and the P&G data, to try to see what the trends are. Because some of you have probably noticed the same type of thing that I have, as you see the same kinds of things coming up over and over and over again. And if you keep getting the same things showing up, then you ought to be focusing more attention on those things. So we're going to do a better job, we hope, of figuring out what that information is telling us. Going to expand the frequently asked questions and answers on the website. We're going to do online voting. We've already experimented with that with the villas, and it went very well. And we'll probably do online voting for the next board election, as I recall. If you have any questions about that, I'll be available to answer whatever questions you might have. But it will be secure to the extent that the software will verify that each household can only vote once. You'll see up there that we'll also make sure that we provide an alternative to digital communication. Interestingly enough, many of us don't use email very frequently. Less than 100 people, but more than just a few, don't look at emails and texts on a regular basis. And so if you have a communication vehicle that depends upon email, you're going to miss some people. And so we're going to make sure that we've got processes in place to take care of the things that need to get to people in alternative ways other than digitally. We want to, in particular, establish better processes and procedures for getting responses to inquiries that people make. I'm sure that a number of you have been frustrated upon occasion by the fact that you ask a question or submit a request and you don't get an answer back as quickly as you would like, and you don't get it taken to the finish line as quickly as you would like. And so we're going to be working particularly on the processes and procedures that guarantee that there is a response of some kind within a minimum period of time, and that's a clear closure process for all of those things. And then we're going to make sure that there's designation of who's responsible for making sure that this happens. Because if you've got processes and procedures, it doesn't do much good unless there's somebody who's accountable for making sure that it happens. Okay. Those are our primary objectives. We've accomplished quite a number of things already. One of the things I want to mention is you've ideally all seen that there's a new community bulletin. Pay attention to the community bulletin. There's going to be lots of very, very good information in there. And that's one of the things that's been a byproduct of all of this, too, as a way to get more specific information to you quickly on new activities. I'm all set, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Very good. Next, we're going to introduce the community engagement pillar, and Luann Morris will walk us through that pillar.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Luann Morris from Clubs and Activities, and our pillar is the community engagement. And these are the members of our team, and if you're here, please stand. Thank you. Gwen James is our board pillar. If she'd stand, please. Thank you, Gwen. Next slide. These are our initiatives. Our first one is update the HOA's communication platform, and this is handled by the Community Communication Committee. Our second initiative is invite board members to speak at events, and a board member is present to speak at the new resident coffee and encourage new residents to become involved in the community. Our third initiative is to re-invite residents to join committees, and a CAC member is also in attendance at the new resident coffee, asking new residents to consider volunteering for a club or activity of their interest. We also recruit for volunteers that's posted in the daily for committees, especially when we have openings. Next slide. Our fourth initiative is to ensure new owners sessions emphasizes the benefit of living in a homeowners community association. Signage is posted for events on the bulletin board, the widescreen TV in the lobby, and the website. Information is knowledge. Our fifth initiative is increase the recognition of our community volunteers, and once a month, a volunteer is spotlighted in the Villager for their contribution to the community. And our motto is do what is best for most. We also spotlight in the Villager, which I mentioned earlier. Stan was our first volunteer of the month, and we'll be doing this monthly that you'll see in the Villager. And, well, I take that back. Kathy Mendisma, she was the first, and Stan was the second, excuse me. And then our last slide is, these are some of the mottos that we have that we post to recruit volunteers for a club or committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next, we have a slide that is, I think, slides, let me put it that way. They're going to be a great interest to you all. And it gets a little technical at times, but I think Warren will do a good job explaining it. So, the preservation of the North Bank Pillar by Warren Marks.
Good morning. This morning I'll be sharing with you the results of our Phase 1 study of the erosion on the Mulberry River. Next slide. This particular initiative was focused on defining the nature of the erosion, the locations of it, and then performing risk analysis to look at where is the erosion occurring, what's the magnitude of the erosion, and what are the methods of mitigation that can be applied to get the erosion under control. That wrapped up our Phase 1 activity with concepts being selected in each of the critical areas. Next slide. Our committee participants from the board were Harvey Berliner, myself, and Bill Walker from Property and Grounds, Alex Teal, Carol Wright, Ellen McGahee, Michael Cox, Paul Bradley, Judy Campbell were our 6 community volunteers, and I want to thank them very much for participating with us. If you're here, please stand. And finally, as part of our team was Engineering 303. They're a very recognized engineering firm across the country for stream and river restorations. They were actually the engineering team that was selected by the town of Brazelton to do the analysis of the Mulberry River going through the Mulberry Park. And they performed a restoration there that is just across on the other side of 211. If you have the opportunity, you can walk over there and see it. But they are handling the technical work for us. Next slide. In Phase 1, their first step was to document the baseline of the Mulberry River. This is going through the back of the clubhouse area. If you look at this area, this is the vehicle bridge, and now we're looking upstream of the vehicle bridge, starting about 500 feet upstream of the vehicle bridge, and then it extended all the way down past the village green for a total of 1,500 feet across our property. You may have noticed we had a team of surveyors out here back in January. They were in the river, on the sides of the river, and they documented all the contours of the river. Based upon the data that they generated, they created these topographical maps, but in addition, they also created 3D models. Against the 3D models, they ran some analytical erosion tools that would predict where erosion is going to occur, the magnitude of the erosion, and be able to establish each of the risk areas. It's broken down into 3 different sections. Upstream of the bridge was Section A, between the vehicle bridge and the pedestrian bridge, Section B, and then the area that's behind the village green, behind the clubhouse, known as Section C. The results of their analytical evaluation identified about 80 feet up from the vehicle bridge, it's an area of very high erosion. This particular area right now is eroding at the rate of about 1 foot a year. That would certainly make us nervous about what was happening there, but more importantly, they pointed out to us this erosion as it takes place. The river flow, which is dominant on the north bank, is going to start being affected by the erosion, and it's going to be redirected down toward the south bank right before the bridge. And so that's an area that certainly was an extreme concern to us. Section B, we had some good news in there. That's an area that was considered to be of moderate erosion risk. And for that area, it's recommended that we look at just passive applications, really plantings, minor hand shaping of this particular area. When we get over to Section C, this is the area that we've all witnessed, the road behind the clubhouse. Right now, it is eroding at the rate of around 2 feet a year. And they was lucky enough to take the top category of extreme. Okay. So we looked at what are our options for each of these areas. The first one we put on the table, what happens if we do nothing? And pointed out that we have a very high erosion that's ongoing there, and our concern is really what happens after that erosion starts taking place. And to make things even more concerning, back at the end of May, Engineering 303 was visiting with us, and they noticed the new sediment deposits upstream of the river and fallen tree observations, and they believe that the erosion in the river is starting to accelerate. So we asked them, what does this mean to us as a community and the risk to a bridge, because that's a really high-cost asset. And they're pointing out in about 3 to 5 years, the south bank of the river will be at the pilings of the bridge. So the clock is running there. The other area behind the village green, very high risk, extreme risk. We have seen that over the years erode, and it's actually costing us about $35,000 a year just to do nothing, but we have to pull out the trees that fall into the river because that's a requirement from the Army Corps of Engineers. So now we had Engineering 303 provide us with concepts. We're looking at, this is the vehicle bridge, this is the north bank and the south bank. The shaded areas in here, you can think of those areas as being excavated areas. And simplistically, the way I like to think of it, they're creating floodplains so that as the river comes up, it has a place to go and spread out into a floodplain. On the top side, they were proposing a 15-foot floodplain, and they gave us 2 choices for the south side, 15 feet or 37 feet. When we inquired about the differences, the 15-foot was really designed for a 5-year flood, and 37 feet for a 25-year flood. I don't know if you remember the flood that we had last year. It was in early July. The river came very high. It was up to some of the fencing behind the clubhouse. That was considered a 25-year flood. Based upon the development that's happening to the west of us, I have nothing but an expectation that the floods will increase and they'll probably get worse. The other choice we had was what type of construction. We selected tow-wood construction, and I have a chart coming up after this which will be able to explain what is tow-wood construction. And using that versus a rock construction, it actually gave us a bit of a cost reduction in that we were able to harvest and reuse some of the trees that were excavated down into this area and use them for erosion control. This is a sample of what that type of a construction looks like. When I say tow-wood construction, these are the roots of the trees. The trees are simply, they're uprooted out of the ground, branches are taken off, and they're rolled over onto their sides, and they're laid down and filled in with soil behind the root mass. This is an extremely effective method for controlling erosion in the river. I mentioned a floodplain. The technical term is a full bank bench, and that's this area here. And what happens there as the water rises during a period of a lot of rain, it has the opportunity to get to the top of the bank and then move sideways into a floodplain area. And that allows actually the river to slow down a bit in its flow going through, and it becomes part of the erosion control process. So that takes care of the design for the vehicle bridge. Next chart. Now, for behind the Village Green area, this is the pedestrian bridge here. It's a similar configuration that they're recommending for the excavation, 15 feet on one side, 37 on the other. We actually have what we affectionately call more of a beach over here. Our choices were really down to what type of construction would we want or would we prefer in this area. Now, we can go either with the tow-wood construction that I showed you previously, or we could use a rock structure. And the rock structure provides a very clean look in terms of that. It's behind the clubhouse. It's an area that's seen by everyone, and it would certainly be very nice to have nice-looking landscape back there as opposed to the erosion mess that we see now. And it integrates well with the existing bedrock down in this area, and we have a tributary going in here. Now, when I say we use a rock structure, what does that really mean? This is the rock structure. It's in the stream. It's called a J-hook. There's one here, and then there's another J-hook down here. And let me show you how that actually works. This is a simple application of a J-hook. Normally, at the low river levels, the bottom of the J is basically just underwater. As you go up the long leg of the J, it's rocks, and you can think of this as an inclined plane. As the water level starts increasing, the water gets to the top of the rocks, and then it spills over this toward the center of the stream. And this continues all the way up as the river is rising. And what it does, it stabilizes the flow. So instead of a large river flow alongside the side where erosion would be occurring, it's forcing the water back into a stabilized center of the stream. Now that we have our concepts identified, the next step is to go forward with a phase 2. That's the detailed design. And what comes out of detailed design, that's all really your construction drawings. From a time frame perspective, that doesn't take that long to do. The longer pole in that tent is state and federal permitting. That could easily take up to 6 months to perform. but you can't go ahead with any type of work until the permitting is in place. With the permitting in place and the construction documents, now you're ready for phase 3. That would go out for bids. We would expect probably about 6 different companies bidding on it because this is a large construction contract. And we would have an engineering team managing the construction work for us. The actual time of construction, that's probably in the area of 3 to 6 months. And the important thing here is that the ideal time to start construction is in the fall. That allows any of the plantings that are put in place to establish themselves before the spring comes around and you start getting the rains in the spring. So that kind of wraps up our project, where we are, and what it looks like for going forward.
Thank you, Warren. I told you do a good job explaining that. It can be a little technical, but Warren spent a lot of time on this and has it well in hand. Next, we have the technology-enabled lifestyle pillar, and our own Cam led that effort. So Jennifer, if you would.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Good, good. Okay, so as we all know, technology can really help our lives. It can also be a big headache, but we try to work through it and try to make things easier for you, the residents, as we're adding new forms of technology for you to use to communicate with the HOA and accomplish tasks. So our pillar team consists of Barbara Byrne, Don Gerard, Fred Koch, myself, Christy Crawford, Roy LeBeau, Susan Watson, and then Ed DiNardo is our liaison. So if you're on my pillar, if you could please stand up. So thank you guys. Without the input of others and our collaboration, our pillar wouldn't be successful. Next slide, please. So in the beginning, we set forth these 3 initiatives to develop a plan to refresh the use of technology, follow a systematic plan to implement and ensure that the plan addresses households of EDC that do not use technology. So how do we do that? First thing that we came up with, and I'm going to ask Christy to come up for a minute, is we implemented this Techie Tuesday class. And this is helping us offer education to residents that aren't familiar with technology, as well as giving us an avenue to educate people when we do add new things for you to use. So come on up for a second here, Christy. Christy does a wonderful job, and if you haven't taken her class, you should really check them out. Go ahead and tell them.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you. For those that don't know me, my name is Christy Crawford. I'm the Lifestyle Director. First, I do want to thank Barbara Burney for helping me with the class curriculum. I know I saw you.
She's here.
There you go. Okay. She really helped a lot for the beginning for us to figure out what kind of information we were going to set for every student that came in, because we have like a really wide range of experience. We have different skill levels. We even have different hardware between Macs and PC. So that was a real challenge, but it's been a lot of fun. So we have 2 classes. We break it up into the 101, which is for absolute beginners. We go over terminology, we go over the fundamental stuff. We cover everyday programs like email and Word, internet navigation. We also have how-to demonstrations, which I feel is really helpful when we do things like attaching downloading files or desktop organization, things that some of us take for granted. Other people are looking at it for the first time, and it's nice to give them that one-on-one. But we also end each class with a Q&A session. So it helps me to kind of gauge where we are. Are we going too fast? Are we going too slow? Do we need to add something else to it? Then we have our next class, which is called Silver Surfers. Those are the residents that already have some basic knowledge and are pretty good. But we dive a little bit deeper into the latest applications, such as FaceTime. We did Google Earth, YouTube, Pinterest. We also have some subjects like AI. We had some fun with AI. I know I scared some in my class with some of the AI, but it was fun. We did. We went over a lot of that. We also talked about cybersecurity, just different things in the technology that we were going up. Now, we also have workshops coming up. So in October, we will have 3 workshops, and we'll have subject matter experts. So I'm working on getting someone here from Apple. We have someone specifically for cybersecurity coming, and there's some other things as well for cell phones coming up. So anyways, it's been a lot of fun. I hope you get to join us. If you have any recommendations or anything that you may be struggling with, I'm open for suggestions. We have a good time. Like I said, I gotta give it back. She said only 1 minute.
Well, we know Christy. I was like, just, come on. But thank you, Christy, because she's just doing a wonderful job. And yeah, we're real proud of the Techie Tuesday program, and we thank you, Christy, for all your hard work, and our volunteers that come to help on those class days. You'll see on our initiatives, we do work closely with the Communications Committee and the website subcommittee to accomplish some of our goals. We want to make sure that we're working together and trying not to duplicate efforts. But so Dick touched on online voting, but that was also one of our initiatives, and we did a successful election with the villas. And it was really, really easy. That's the feedback that I got from the residents there. And as Dick mentioned, we have, so we've done that test, and we are able to perform the election in such a way that it will be anonymous. So we meet that qualification. We've figured a way to make sure that only 1 vote per household will come in, and that will be from the primary user. So as we get closer, in October, we're going to start publishing some information about how this online voting system will work. And we'll also offer some classes during one of the Silver Surfer afternoons on the online voting system, so that when March comes, you should feel comfortable with it. And remember how we said we don't want to leave people out, so we will have stations set up during specific periods in the clubhouse where there'll be someone there to help those that aren't tech savvy. So we don't want to leave anyone out. The online ticket sales has been going pretty well. We're happy that we're now able to take payments. We've had a few glitches with that, and we appreciate everyone's patience as we work through those and get that system working great. And we, assessing website current and future needs, that's also big in conjunction with the website subcommittee. Susan Watson is liaison with them so that we can make sure that we're moving forward towards the goals of our initiative. Notification systems is something that we're looking at possibly a text, so that we can get a text out quickly if it's on the weekend and I need to tell you something quickly. That might be an easy way for us to communicate and do notifications. But we're looking into the cost and benefit of that right now. The clubhouse registration and the HOPE survey are 2 things that we're also looking to take online. So when you are moved in, you're a new resident, you come into the clubhouse, there's a bunch of forms to fill out. So we are, looking at taking that online, as well as the HOPA survey. And that HOPA survey, that's what we do every 2 years to make sure the age verification. So we're looking at a secure way that we can do that to make sure that we're, can identify that you are the person filling it out. So we have a little bit of time, since how we just completed that, but we do hope that the next time we do that, we'll be able to take that online. Lastly, we recently came up with the AV Club Interest Group, and that is more of, if you're interested in audio visual, and this was actually came from a couple people, someone from the Finance Committee recommended that it would be good if we had residents that knew how to run our AV system. And, right now, Christy and I run the stream. It gives us headaches. I do apologize that the slides aren't showing, but we will have those uploaded, and I think you can follow along at home later. Would be better so that you can see everything that's being presented on the slides. But just having a group of people so that maybe we can make improvements. We have, we're not working with the same company that did the installation, so they are looking at a new software, and that software that we use to do the stream is the thing that is always giving us trouble. So we are looking at ways to improve that. And the good news is, with most of the stuff that we have here, online voting, the registrations, will save money instead of cost money. So, with the election going online and saving on the postage and all the printing and the envelopes, you're looking at about $2,500 a year savings. So anyway, we hope to be able to save paper and move towards that paperless management, but of the community in time. Right? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, next we'll hear about the Enhanced and Modernized Security Pillar. Clark Burney is going to present that and tell you what they've been doing for the vehicle access in other areas of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, my name's Clark Byrne, and this is our pillar group, Enhanced and Modernized Security. We've got our folks here. If you would stand, I think Susan's here and Carol's here. Michael, Jay's here. Special thanks to Roger Auber. Roger began his tenure with the group, and he accepted one of those $450 an hour jobs. So as a professional project manager, he's helping build the cat food manufacturing facility up in Hart County. So he's a busy guy right now. So I understand that. I agreed to carry on the flag and move forward with the project, and I'm very familiar with project management and high technology positions. So that's our group, and thanks to everybody. It's very technical. It's kind of like the river. There's a lot of stuff, and a lot of folks here don't like that stuff. They like easy, they like one button push and so forth. So we try to keep that in mind when we're moving forward with all these opportunities. Next slide, thanks. The committee of volunteers agreed to form 3 different subgroups, so we wanted to kind of take a chunk of the elephant at a time. We wanted to understand the existing state of our security operations, how we were fenced in, how we were gated in, how people got access to and from our community, so forth. Our process followed all these project management objectives and principles, so that helped center people. When you have large groups, you tend to get off-center often. So we kept reminding ourselves at each meeting that we needed to stay on task, stay on center to get the job done. Next slide. The first group looked at what do we do currently. They looked at what the strengths of what we have are, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. And we did a very good job, that group. They walked the perimeter physically They took photographs of everything they thought were good ideas, suggestions, so forth. And then we got a little bit off center. So we do have all that information now. We've got it on file, what kind of recommendations we might have for our perimeter going forward. And that group came back with all their suggestions. The second subcommittee, they contacted communities that are very similar to VDC all over Georgia, and they visited these facilities and took a look at how those facilities managed everything that we do. What are our similarities? What are our differences? What could we do better? What vendors they use, what processes they have. You know, do they force you to have an ID when you come in? Do they keep record of who enters and exits? Do they have video footage of people coming and going? So if there's an incident, they can look up that incident and provide that information to the local authorities if there's a law being broken, etc. So that's of great importance. A lot of time spent. We're talking hundreds of hours from this group. The third committee, they were focused on the traffic flow and the access control of the gates, front and back. We've researched, interviewed vendors, chose features that would be applicable to VDC's current and future desired states. We created an RFP, which is a formal request for proposal. Basically, you go down the list and you say, you know, I want a blue car with windshield wipers, good brakes, seat belts, and so you come up with this sheet of 27, 45, 96 things you want to have in your system. It's got to have battery backup in case the power goes off. It's got to allow the EMS people to enter any time of the day or night. So all that stuff is entered into this system of thought, and the RFP's created. We've sent those RFPs out. We've heard back and we've interviewed vendors. We've got 4 companies that we like, and they are responding to our request. We just had a group come through this morning that I ushered around. If you saw us walking the gates in the parkway this morning. So we're on our 3rd group that's physically been on site, and they've taken photographs and they Googled Earth us, and you know, they see everything that they need to do. What do they need to dig up? What do they need to add? What do they need to throw away that we already have? What can we use? Can we still use our RFIDs? Can we do something different? So our thought process is, let's see what we need to do now, and let's think 5 years down the road, where can we be? A lot of people have heard of systems like Flock. Our neighbors next door at Reunion has a Flock system. You know, that's the one that caught the guy that shot people and ran around, and it's a camera system that gets the ID of the car through the license plate and the vehicle type and all that, and the software is designed to identify everything about the vehicle. Anyway, they use that system both in and out of their community. So, you know, they're not a gated community, so that was a good option for them. But all these communities are starting to do things like that and utilize high technology to enhance their security. And that's where we're at. We've got the information back. We'll send all that information to the board. Our board liaison, Jim, you want to stand? You'll see Jim walking around with high technology stuff all the time. But he's doing financial math, not the gate stuff. But that's what we're doing. That's where we're at, and hopefully in the next month we'll gather all these RFPs. They'll have pricing, and you'll be able to study the numbers and see what we believe we need to do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. Very good. Okay, we have our last, but certainly not our least pillar, right? Because I know everybody, when they drive into the village of Deaton Creek, they say how beautiful it is, right? All the landscaping. So the landscaping is also a big challenge, but Landscaping for the Future pillar was led by Mark Copper, and Mark's going to give us a presentation on what they've been doing.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by, those of you who were present when we rolled this thing out, this is really the schedule that we saw at the end of the year last year. Our initiatives include commissioning a study, which these roughly correspond to the first 3 lines. First line starts at Q3 of 2022. Second line is the next one, and then goes from 24 to 26. The main thing to remember on this is a 3-year plan. This is not intended to be 1 year and spend a whole lot of money to try and correct everything that's been done over the past 12 years or whatever. So keep that in mind when we're talking about what we're trying to do. The commission is really to try and enhance our already existing landscape along the parkway. That includes both the entrances on Friendship as well as Union Church. So we'll be taking a look at what's happening from Friendship all the way to Union Church, both from a positive standpoint and a negative standpoint, to determine what needs to be done, what we can enhance, what we can change, what we can remove, start over, to overall enhance the look of the community as people drive in and as we go out. And also keep in mind, viewing these things can be done 2 different ways. One, you're doing it at 20 or 30 miles an hour, and you're going to get an opinion of the way things look as you're driving in your car. But there's also people who walk the sidewalks and trails and things like that. So you're trying to balance how people see it as you're driving along, as well as how you're seeing it as you're walking along. You're more meticulous and more detailed as you're walking along as opposed to driving through. So we're trying to make it look good for everybody that goes through, okay? The Pillar team is centered on members of the Property and Grounds. I'm on the Property and Grounds. Warren is on our committee. He's on Property and Grounds. Ken Smith is also on Property and Grounds. We've also got 3 other resident volunteers. Barbara Allen, who I see right there in second row. Dave Frainer, who is currently in New Jersey, and Jay Zychek, who is, if anyone's here, let's stand up and identify yourself. Okay, one of the first things that we did as a group, as everybody has their own opinions about how things look, where they look well, where they look good, not so good. First thing we did a survey. And these are some examples. There's a couple of different slides here. You can read these for yourself. These are pictures of actual conditions along the parkway. Turf loss was a big item that we've seen up and down the parkway. And this is caused in some parts by shade created by trees. It's caused by drainage problems. It can be caused by the soil conditions. We don't necessarily have the best soil here. So the first 2 pictures are turf loss. The third picture is that anyone who's taken a walk from Falling Water up to the guardhouse along the parkway will see that we've had trees that are planted between the parkway and the sidewalk, and the growth of the trees have lifted our sidewalks. And as a member of Property and Grounds, we've been kind of struggling with this for years to make sure it's not a safety issue, but this is an issue that we will need to address and continue to need to address all the time. Next slide, please. That one over there, pine straw ground cover. Pine straw has become kind of the go-to thing these days. When something doesn't look as good as it should, or we haven't done something for it, let's put pine straw over it and cover it up. If you take a close look at what's going on along the parkway, you'll see a lot of areas like the one in the picture where there's nothing there. There may have been something there, but things have disappeared. Plants get in distress, and you have to take them out and you have to cover them with something. So what we're trying to address is make the parkway look less pine straw dominant, okay? The second planting is along the parkway, very near Ivy Stone. We have a distressed juniper, and in fact, that whole path there is in bad shape. Like all of us, plants have a lifespan, and a lot of what we've planted up until now has reached their lifespan. So we're looking at taking those plants that are at the end of their cycle and put in something new so we can continue to improve. The last photograph here represents kind of a pet peeve of mine. We have a number of these hollies that are meticulously trimmed and shaped, and a lot of effort goes into these, and they're up and down the parkway. And in my opinion, there's really no need to have this kind of sculpturing done on this kind of thing. We can't lose sight of the fact that a lot of our HOA fees and the cost that we give to, the money that we give to Brightview is for maintaining this kind of stuff. The more things we have them sculpt and form and put a lot of effort in, it costs us more money. So we're looking at addressing the overall maintenance to make sure that we're not putting too much maintenance in and still get a nice look, okay? All right, so after we did the survey, the idea was to solicit outside help to create a design, to look critically at what we have now and create a design that we can implement that meets all the objectives that we talked about before. In order to do that, we decided to use a landscape architect. None of us on the committee is so inclined to take that job on. So we wrote up a spec, a tentative spec, and a request for proposal, and circulated it to 4 different landscape architects. We interviewed all 4 landscape architects and spent time walking up and down the parkway, identifying the areas that we've just talked about and others to try and make sure they understood the scope of what we're trying to do, and also explain the timeline, the 3-year timeline that we're trying to achieve. We heard back from 3 of them, and of the 3, we chose one who has experience with HOAs like us to do these kinds of changes to make other properties look a little bit better. The one that we chose was from Alpharetta. And so the next slide will show what his phases are right now. Right now, he's done a site analysis, which really is him taking a critical look at the entire length of the parkway, making photographs and comments along the parkway, and then submitting those drawings back to us as the HOA representatives. And at that, now we have that. We've finished that first phase from him. And we as a committee will be reviewing that over the next 2 weeks, 2 or so weeks, to have our own comments about what he said we should do. And then once we get our comments together, we'll go back to him and say, okay, well now let's get together and figure out what we can include, what we can't include, and how we implement this. That's the master plan development. It's targeted for mid-September, but they may take a little longer depending upon what we say to him and what he says back to us. The third phase is the landscape maintenance that he'll be working on. As I said, the important thing to remember is we're trying to address how much maintenance we're requiring for these plants and plantings to achieve the look that we're anticipating to do. So if a landscape architect specifies 25 rows of roses, let's say, and every year Brightview, whoever our landscaper is, takes it upon themselves to decide how they should be trimmed or cut or culled or whatever, then the overall design may not be what was intended. So we have to make sure that whatever we decide, however we do the implementation of the design, that that information is transmitted to Brightview or whoever it is, and they do what we say they need to do. And we need to make sure as a community, and Property and Grounds be all over this, that it's done the way the designer wants, and so we achieve what we want. Because we can put in plants all day long. If we don't maintain them right, they're not going to look right. They're just not. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Okay, so we've heard from all the pillars, and some of you may have had some thoughts in your head about questions. So we're at the Q&A session. If you have any questions on any of the pillar presentations, we're going to open the floor up to those questions now. Christy has a mic. So if see your hand, or there's a hand back there, Christy.
Make sure it's working. Okay.
And I don't know who's going to
Where
get
was the hand
mic.
at? Oh, okay. Here it is.
What exactly is the
I'm sorry, can we get you to stand, please, and just recognize who you are, if you don't mind,
Okay.
just so folks can.
What exactly is the responsibility of the Corps of Engineers?
Corps of Engineers
To our
responsibilities?
property, to our property?
The Corps of Engineers is responsible for monitoring all the waterways that flow through Georgia. So we're just one of many waterways that they monitor. They do impose requirements upon the individuals who have land abutting up to the river in terms of what you can do, can't do. If a tree falls down in the river and is blocking the river, it's your responsibility to take that tree out.
What about erosion? They have no responsibility for erosion?
None.
You know where the walk path is from the dog park, the pretty little walk around, ends up by the river?
Yes,
And, okay.
I think I am.
Across the way is some rock, oh dear, I don't know what they call it. But was that put in by the Corps of Engineers or early on?
No,
Really?
no.
Yes. That's the term. Okay, thank you. The county put it in?
Thank you, Warren.
Okay, thank you.
We have another, Christy?
Yeah.
Up here, we have another
All
question?
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Kushma, and I live up on Lantern Ridge. I have a follow-on question to the one that was just had. It was something that I was thinking about. What involvement had we had during this whole design processing of the Corps of Engineers? So that we don't find when we get to the end of the process, the Corps of Engineers says, you ain't going to do that. And the second follow-up is, how have we looked at downstream and upstream, what's going on with other communities that affects the flow of the water into our area? Because without that, we don't know that we're addressing the right things. So
Well,
that's my.
Let's see if I can handle both of those. First of all, what's happening downstream and upstream, right now, I don't know how you control that. I mean, that's state, county laws, regulations. I don't know that there are very significant regulations on the waterways in terms of water coming into communities. I mean, we're witnessing a lot more water, and it's not coming there by magic. I mean, it's running off from other communities, and it's just the nature of the beast when you have development.
Well, I think that's most of these questions don't require a yes or no answer, so they get iterative as you go through. But I think while we can't control what those people are doing, we can understand what they're doing and make sure that we understand what effects are being experienced on our properties today. And the other thing was, again, how have we engaged the Corps of Engineers during our initial studies?
The Corps of Engineers is in contact with Engineering 303 or vice versa continually. They work through the Corps of Engineers. From their perspective, that's probably the easiest agency of all for them to work through. They have far more difficulty with the state and the county, but they're very well recognized. Engineering 303 is very well recognized by the Corps of Engineers and respected.
So we haven't worked with the Corps of Engineers directly. We've gone through Engineering 301 or
I think we've had occasional contacts with the Corps of Engineers, and quite frankly, they don't particularly care for talking to individuals popping in and out who really don't understand the rules, regulations that you have to abide by. So you don't get a lot of attention from them. You need to get somebody who understands what they're talking about when they go to the Corps of Engineers, and so they can lay out either the problems or the approaches. Right now, the Corps of Engineers is looking at whatever your plans are for making changes along the river and making sure it's going in the right direction of improving the conditions of the river.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, do we have any other questions? I see some more hands up here, Christy.
I'm John Mercer. One thing that is definitely missing in the presentation today, although I think somebody's going to address it after the Q&A, is the cost of these projects. More specifically, I assume that we're going to hear something about the cost of the landscaping plan for the Parkway, and I'm particularly interested in the cost of the river erosion remediation. We've already spent $40,000 for the study, the evaluation. The board has already approved $103,000 for the design and permitting stage. And folks, you need to understand that what's being proposed is going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000. And we have to maintain that $600,000 worth of work, which the engineer's report says is going to cost 1/3 to 1/2 of what we spend on the construction. So are we going to address that and let people know how that's going to affect our pocketbooks?
Thank you, John, for the question. Yes, we absolutely intend to address that after we wanted to first have the Q&As about any questions on the particular pillars, and then our treasurer, Jim Minch, will get up and address the specifics on the cost impact to the community. So that will be addressed right after the Q&As.
Hi there. My name is Debbie. I have a question for the landscaping pillar. How much consideration is the landscape designers taking as far as using native Georgia plants or non-invasive plants in the community?
That's a good question. One thing that we discussed early on when we interviewed all of the candidates for landscape architects were that we had to have sustainable and Georgia plants that would grow here. We want to use as much as we can and make it more of a Georgia kind of thing. We don't want to put in plants from Chicago or things like that. So I'm not trying to be flip about that. We are trying to make sure that they're aware of our needs, and all of them have expressed to us that that's what they would do. You have another question?
Along those lines,
Sorry. Sorry, I did that out of line. Sorry.
I know. Along those lines with the landscaping, Landscape engineers are notorious, though, for trying to promise what we think we like. And I'm sure they do their due diligence, but we need to possibly consider, if you haven't already, using UGA, the Ag Center, to review some of the things they give us. Because, again, they want to please us, but short-term may not be what we really need. So that's a resource that we might, if you haven't already considered.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Hi, Barbara Allen.
She's going to ask me.
Yep.
Warren, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. One of the questions I have lots of questions about the preservation of the north bank of the Mulberry River, and I'm not going to ask them all here. You can take a deep sigh of relief. But I do want to make sure that, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that funds for mitigation activities and restorative activities are not currently in the reserve fund. And given that they're not in the reserve fund, I just want to verify that we will have a community review if the projected expenditures will exceed $150,000 as per the bylaws. And if we are going to have a separate community review for this particular expenditure, then we'll have an opportunity to ask a lot of additional questions. So that's the question that I have. I want to verify, because I'm assuming there's going to be more than $150,000 that we're looking at. And I want to make sure that we are going to have, the entire community will have an opportunity to hear about what the financing options are and what other options are. So that's a yes or no.
Well, so as I mentioned, Barbara, Jim Minch is going to get up and present the finances right after this question and answer session about the specifics of the technical areas of the pillars. So Jim will get into that in just a moment.
Okay, so he'll be able to respond to that.
He'll be able to respond.
And then the second question is, I don't know anything about erosion, except I do know I lived in California for a while, and a lot of people were building properties along the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean, and before we knew it, their homes were toppling into the ocean. So I do think Hall County planning is responsible for approving development, all this development in this unincorporated area, the development of Northeast Georgia hospital systems, the developments upstream. All of these developments may be impacting the river flow. That's my naive, kind of uninformed sense. And I think it would be helpful to have somebody from Hall County Planning really look at what's happening with the increasing rate of erosion and advise us in terms of what are the next best steps and what can we anticipate in the future, one way or the other. Are we going to have to do restorative efforts every 5 years? Is that what's anticipated? I have no idea how much money has been spent. I mean, the river was here before we moved here, right? And I bought in 2007. So what's happened from 2007 to 2023? Have we expended money? Have we done studies? Have the mitigation efforts failed? Why did they fail? I mean, there's lots of questions, unanswered questions, that I like to hear about in order to know whether or not it's a wise investment to put additional money in. And I'd like some outside consultation, like from Hall County. Have during this committee, did you guys ever talk to Hall County Planning?
No, all of the permitting has to go through Hall County for approval on the any proposed changes to the river. Right now, quite frankly, I would like certainly to see the amount of water control that's coming across our property. But, you know, that's, I think, in the order, from my perspective, of trying to solve world hunger here. My biggest concern right now is we have a bridge there that's a high-value asset, that if we don't do anything about it, the river's going to do something about it for us. And if you start talking about having to replace a bridge of multi-million dollars, I think that kind of weighs into the equation.
Thanks. My name is Phyllis. It's unfortunate, and I think we would have benefited from hearing Jim's presentation about the costs before we were asking questions, because there's no doubt, as Barbara indicated, that there is requirements in our bylaws on the board's actions, and we ought to be assured that those bylaws are being followed in regard to having meetings with community feedback before we expend dollars, because we know, if you've looked at, I don't know how many of you have, because the board has refused to post it, but the study that Engineering 303 calls for $600,000. So, but here's part of my questions, and this would perhaps be answered if we had had a community review. I'm a little puzzled about the urgency. I went back and I looked at the P&G minutes in March of '22. Those minutes reflect that Atlas Technical deemed the bridge to be healthy. Then, despite that healthy report, the very next month, Engineering 303 is engaged. Then the P&G minutes in March of 2023 states, and I quote, "Warren reported a preliminary analysis has been received from Engineering 303 and is under review. It addressed 3 areas of concern: vehicular bridge, pedestrian bridge, and village green." And this is the key phrase: "The initial review revealed no immediate within 5-year concern is evident." Now, I'm puzzled if, and not to take away from the fact that we obviously recognize the need to maintain the bridge and prevent some huge expense later on, but I'm puzzled when I go back and look at the minutes and we're told that there's no 5-year concern, and then suddenly we're hearing in a board meeting from one of the board members who states that the south end of the bridge is going to be gone in 3 years. So I think whether it's in this meeting or whether it's in a community review, we're owed more explanations before we start, the board commits to $600,000 without a community review.
Maybe I can shed a little bit of light on it. I think you're referring to a preliminary observation on the bridge across the Mulberry River. The initial observation was that the erosion was occurring on the north bank, but the expectation would be that it was in the order of maybe 5 or 10 years. No calculations, no data was generated. This is one individual's observation. Once they went in and did all this surveying and they assembled models of the bridge, they came back and they found out the erosion was at a much higher level than they expected, which would infer that the path, the river flow, would start veering away from the north bank to the south bank. That opened the door to another complication. And then they followed up more recently. Our final report that we got from them was at the end of May. Their observation at that point in time was that sediment was starting to form on the south bank upstream from the vehicle bridge, and that's an indication that the water is flowing much slower there, and the river is shifting further north and be in a position to accelerate the erosion that's going to occur on the north bank and then start redirecting the river. And that's when they put the notion, the opinion, that it would be a 3 to 5 year problem as opposed to initially a guesstimate of a 5 to 10 year problem.
Thank you, Warren. I think we see a lot of the focus is on the cost impacts of these different pillars and all. So we're going to ask Jim to get up and do his presentation now, and then we'll have an opportunity for more questions and answers after. Thank you. Yep.
During this presentation, I will talk about the question relative to the bylaws and $150,000. But bear with me till I get to that point. First of all, we decided that obviously these were not budgeted items. None of these items were in the reserve fund. They weren't budgeted in the reserve fund. No one knew we'd have to have the problem with the river. We had some reserve fund money to maintain the parkway, and there's still some budget money there to maintain the parkway. The strategic planning teams came back and said, we need to redo this parkway, make it alive, and it's our showcase to our community when people come by to buy our houses. So the monies we have to maintain a bush here and there, or whatever, that wasn't going to accomplish the goal of refurbishing, giving new life to this parkway. So we said, okay, we're going to have funding for these things. Let's put together a team of people who are somewhat familiar with the finances of the community to see what's the best way to fund this. So the team we put together was me, Bill Perkins, who's our finance chair. I think Bill's here somewhere. Then John Harris, who was the treasurer for, I think, at least 4 years. And then Steve Zachuk, who was a HOA president for about 4 years, plus he was the liaison to Pulte, plus now he's a member of the Finance Committee. If you have a whole bunch of people, you folks know that committees work best if you have a small group of knowledgeable people and let them make a decision. So this group met for several hours, a couple times, and came up with a plan. Next slide, please. Okay, how much is this thing going to cost? And these are estimated costs because we don't really have any engineering contracts or construction contracts. But based on the expertise of 303 Engineering, who just finished over a 2-mile project, I think it was over 2 miles, was it, Warren? With Brazelton, much bigger project than we're talking about. They have some idea of what these costs are going to be and what the construction costs might be. So we estimate the cost of the Mulberry River project at about $1.1 million. Dean Creek Parkway, once again, as Mark told you, we don't really have any hard numbers yet, but we said, you know what, we can manage that project. We can make some choices along the road in that project. What we spend on, what we don't spend on. Let's budget $250,000. The other 4 projects, enhanced security. By the way, that security pillar was focused on vehicle traffic, vehicle access to our community. It wasn't focused on people walking in on their 2 legs. It was a controlled vehicle traffic is what that focus was in that committee. Communication excellence, tech lifestyle, and community engagement. The only one of those that really is going to have much capital involved with it is the gate operation. So we put in about $92,000 estimated funds. So the total estimated cost of this thing is $1.44 million over a 3 to 4 year period. Now, here's the thing to remember. None of these items are included in the reserve budget or in the current operating budget. So I've stood up here before and I've told you many times, we likely won't have assessments. And we wouldn't have an assessment based on things we have for reserve. Things that we planned for, operating or reserve for years, we're covered there. Our roads, we're covered for those things. These are items that were out of scope, that weren't envisioned. And so now I'm going to tell you today that for the first time, the way we fund this is with an assessment. So now before you panic, let me show you what the assessment will be. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the way this is going to work out. It's going to be $35 a month for 3 years, starting in January of 2024. That will cover all of these things, and you will have a separate bill from CMA for $35 a month. Next slide. How is that going to work? Let me back up a minute. We're talking about an assessment. Let's talk about this bylaw thing, about $150,000. If you read that bylaw, that specifically says reserve funds. Special assessments, if you read the CC&Rs, the board can levy special assessments for unforeseen things like this is at any time without any community review. Now, Ed and I have talked. Even though it's not required, our plan is to have a $35 a month assessment for 3 years. If there's enough interest of the community to have a review, we'll do a review before we implement this. But it's not 10 or 15 people. It's going to take a couple hundred people to express an interest to have a review. But it's not required. We can have a special assessment under the CC&Rs based on what the board thinks is the right thing to do. And you know what? You got to think, this is what protects the equity in your house. If we don't maintain this community, there's plenty of competition around right now. New developments popping up all over the place that would be glad to take the buyer for your house down to Crestwinds or over across the street. So it's important that we maintain these things. I'll give you another example of what can happen. Going back to the bridge. I play golf, and many of you probably do at Chateau Elan. There's a small community bridge on a private road in Chateau Elan between the 3rd green and the 4th tee box. About 12 months ago, guess what? The river wiped out the banks below the side of that bridge. That road has been closed for 11 months, and they have built a huge concrete culvert bridge that I promise you it's got to be well over $2 million. So for 11 months, they still don't have a road, by the way. They still can't use their road. For 11 months, they've had no road, and they're going to spend a fortune for exactly what can happen to our bridge. They lost one end of their bridge to the river. Exactly the same thing. And those of you that play golf there know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen that ridge. Okay. How are we going to pay for this? And this is really just a cash flow amortization. In year 1, we're going to collect $480,000 of our $35 a month. Now, Warren told you most of his project is going to happen in the fall of 2024. And the initial phase of that project, I said 1.1 million. That includes some contingency funds. We think the construction phase is about, up through construction, we think it's about $850,000. Well, obviously, if we collect $480 in 2024, and we need $850, we have a shortfall. So how do we fund that shortfall? We transfer about $360,000 from our reserve fund, and I'm going to go over reserves right after this slide to show you where we stand in reserves. We transfer $360,000 from our reserve fund over to the Pillar Fund to fund the river project. Starting in January 2025, if you notice, the first 9 months, we collect $40,000 a month in the assessment. The first 9 months of assessment, it's not income, it's paying back that transfer. So the first 9 months of 2025, we're going to pay back the entire $360,000 back to the reserve account. So that will be covered within 9 months, and my next slide will show you how reserve will stand during that period of time. It's still well funded. And then after we pay off the reserve account, we'll still have some income. So in 2025, we'll add $115,000 to the Pillar account. 2026, we'll add $480,000 to the Pillar account for a total of $1.441 million, like I said. So over 3 years, your pocketbook is going to hit you for $35 a month. But what that $35 a month is going to get you is a new parkway, a refurbished parkway. The bank, we don't have to worry about our bridge. Our bridge is solid. There's nothing wrong with our bridge. I heard the comment too about we heard the bridge was good. The bridge is gone. There's nothing wrong with it. But if the bank goes away, you got no bridge. That's what happened to Chateau Elan. Their bridge is okay, but their bank went away, and they lost the thing. Next slide, please. Okay, you probably got concerned about, well, we're taking some money out of reserves. Here's what reserves will look like. And these are pretty solid numbers. We're going to begin 2025 with almost $400,000 in our CIT bank account. This is a reserve account. We're going to collect $384,000 in dues contributions to the reserve account. Capital contribution, that is the money we make from new residents moving in. They make that deposit in reserve accounts. Then you notice where I say transfer from the CIT pillar account, that's the payback of that money we took out in the fourth quarter. Then this transfer to Morgan Stanley of $700,000, that's simply cash management. We're going to have too much money in a non-interest bearing checking account. We're going to put that into Morgan Stanley. And for example, right now, we have a daily liquidity money market account at Morgan Stanley that pays what, Bill, 4.7? So we have daily liquidity on money at 4.7%. So we don't want to leave $700,000 in CIT Bank and get no interest when we can put it over to Morgan Stanley and get it back whenever we want on 4.7%. So we'll still have total cash available of $480,000 just in our bank accounts. I don't really know what our expenses are going to be in 2025, but a good ballpark number would be $300,000. We seem to spend between $250,000 to $400,000 a year, so we'll hone on that number a little more as we go to 2025. But let's assume we spend $300,000 in 2025 on reserve items. That leaves $180,000 in cash, but we still have $1.66 million in Morgan Stanley. So the total funds available to cover the items in reserve study is $1.8 million. I put this slide in to give you comfort that even though we're going to take 9 months, transfer that $360,000 from reserve to the pillar account, the reserve account is still very well funded. So I think that is the end of my presentation. Now there's another opportunity for Q&A.
Hi, I'm Margie. Let me first say I am fully in support of your financial plan. Brief background, my husband and I were in local government for 25 years in Florida, on both sides of the podium, in administration, budgeting, engineering, auditing, variety of departments, and spent at least one night a week, every week for 25 years in commission meetings and budget hearings where citizens would come and listen to a well-thought-out, effective and efficient proposal for plans, whether it was a new bridge, a new fire station, a bypass, you name it. And they shot themselves in the foot time after time because they were short-sighted. They only looked at that moment. They didn't need a road right then. So they waited, and they didn't want to pay the small amount of money to be preemptive. So they would wait, and 5 or 7 or 10 years later, when now the need is overbearing, now it's cost 3 and 4 times the amount, and it inconveniences everybody, and it's not effective and not efficient. And then, of course, they blame government, because why didn't you make us do this, right? So I'm just saying, let's not be short-sighted. You can spend more than $35 a month getting a pizza once a month. So let's just keep it real that these are things that will need to be done at some point. And I'm not on any of the committees. I don't have a vested interest, but my whole life was sitting in commission meetings, listening to us try to help people protect themselves against themselves, and it often didn't work. And then they blame the committees. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Any more? Phyllis has a question back here.
Okay.
I don't think that any of us here are debating whether or not we expect the board to fulfill their obligation to maintain our community, and that if it takes money from us to do that, But even with the explanations that's been provided, Jim, that you just provided, and to me, your explanation is open to debate.
Obviously.
I mean, clearly the bylaws say maintain a reserve fund to pay for repair, replacement, and improvement of existing community assets. It requires you to have, of course, update your reserve studies. And then, as Barbara indicated, if it's greater than $150,000 or 10% of the expense, then it's up to community review.
Phyllis, if you would read the CC&Rs about the special assessments, the board has the power to make a special assessment for unbudgeted items at any given time.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll finish my comment. I guess my question would be, since it appears open debate, my question would be whether or not legal counsel has been involved in this decision and review. But let's even get beyond that. Let's assume all that's happened and it's legally correct. What I would like to suggest is that I think the board and the community would benefit from a more openness and a review. Obviously, this project has been going on for a year, and you've refused to post the engineering report. You've refused to share what was happening on the Capital Improvement Committee. There's other discrepancies here, so I just think, and then you vote to fully fund the project before sharing details with the residents. I just would like to suggest that there might be a more cordial, engaging way to do that. Nothing to take away from your authority as the board, but let's have community engagement before, get our feedback, then move forward, and we will accept that decision.
And I guess in our mindset, this meeting today, before anything happened, was our attempt to share with you in detail the information. So perhaps it's not enough, but that was our attempt today to do that. We can't, there's 1,144 homes in here. I can't knock on every door and get every opinion for everything we do. We have to do things in groups. Like Ed said, before we did a survey at the end of strategic planning, and we said if we don't get 60% top two boxes, we're stopping. The survey came back with like 72% top two boxes. So the community said, move forward with this process. And we moved forward with this process. I don't think we went blindly. How's it? We went out and hired a very accomplished engineering firm that the city of Brazelton, actually they're a nationwide leader engineering firm, to do these things. They know a lot more than we do or any of us in this room do. As I said though before, if this community, now I'm not hearing a lot of support, I'm hearing a lot of clapping, but if the community wants to organize a review, even though the board doesn't have to do it, there's activities that are involved to make that review happen. If that gets organized, we can make that happen, but it's not required, but we can do that. If there's enough people in here who don't want to spend the money, that one pizza a month. Go ahead. Give her the microphone.
I'd like to go back to, I don't think anybody is thinking that we don't have to spend some money to restore, rehabilitate, improve our environment, and protect our assets. We're talking about the process. You say there's 1,144 homes and maybe 1,800 people who live here?
Yeah.
How many people do you think are sitting here today?
108 were registered.
Maybe 10%? Okay. We want to be transparent, and we want to explain to people why things are happening and why we're looking at increasing, having a special assessment, or whatever the determination is. And the board does have a responsibility, and I agree with Phyllis and what the bylaws said, to have a community review. Now, the community review is not couched in a town hall. The community review, using all the wonderful high-tech communication strategies that have been talked about, says we are looking at $1.1 million to protect the north bank of the Mulberry River. We will have a community review to help you understand why it's important, what some of the options are that we investigated, and what are some of the financing options that we're looking at. We, the board, want your input before we make the final decision. That's the community review that we, I think, are asking for, and that is required by the bylaws.
It is not required.
This is not a community view. This is a town hall meeting on the strategic pillars. That's different.
Yeah, here again, it's not required, but I've told you before, if the community wants to engage in that process of $150,000, they can bring that forward and we'll do that. But it takes community involvement to get I think it has to have 60% or 70% of the people to approve that idea. I haven't read that, but it's, that bylaws quote is strictly pertaining to budgeted items. This is a special assessment. There are no requirements for community approval for that. But I've just said, if the community wants to do an approval, we'll do an approval process on this. Yeah, you have to follow the bylaw process to do that.
Jim, as some member of the community who has, we all had the opportunity early on to volunteer to participate in some of these committees. I have been so impressed with the level of technical and project management expertise that has come out of this community to provide these reports back to our neighbors. We are so fortunate to have a board that has the level of expertise that our board has. So I would like to suggest, in the interest of time, that maybe the board take back the feedback from this meeting, let everybody else go about their business today, and then decide how to roll out going forward. But I am so thankful for all the wonderful things that the board has done to bring this information to us.
We'll review the, go ahead, back.
Bring you email addresses where we can ask our questions, because obviously we can't ask all of the questions at once. So I'd like somebody to post email addresses or who we can contact on each pillar so we can ask our questions, because there's no way they could all be asked here. One of my first concerns, sorry, bridge again, or the bank. When we fixed the bank with the rocks on this side, the river moved to the other side. So did we cause our own problem?
That's possible. Pulte put those things there without any engineering study. So that was a, let's do this. Pulte paid for it, and they did that. That's why we said before we do anything, we're going to hire a professional firm that understands the workings of rivers before we make a decision. That was the deal that was probably in good faith, thought it was the right thing to do, but there was not a, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was an engineering study done by Pulte on the river before that Gabion wall was built.
And Hall County would let them do that?
I think Pulte has quite a bit of pull with Hall County right now, but I guess because they did it. I don't really know. I can't answer that accurately.
All right. And why would the gates not be in the reserve study?
The gates?
Yeah. I mean, they're replaceable. You're going to have to replace them eventually.
No.
Why are they not in the reserve study?
We did just replace all the gates funded in the reserve study. This is simply, I'll be honest, we would like to keep guards at those stations forever. Over the past 3 years, twice, we've averted a crisis by having not access to a guard. And ultimately, someday, there may not be people willing to sit in a house 24 hours a day and make $12 an hour. So what we had to do was find out, okay, we want to maintain guards. Marksman's doing a great job. We want to keep marksmen. But what happens someday if marksman comes out and says, we can't hire people anymore? We still want to have a gated community. So Clark and his team have found options to have a gated community, a secure community that doesn't totally rely on a person sitting there 24/7.
Yeah, I didn't hear unmanned security in that presentation.
Well, we don't want to have unmanned security. We want to have manned, but we want to be prepared if someday we can't have manned. The goal is always to have manned security as long as we can hire a firm. But reality says that might not be in perpetuity. So we'd be foolish not to have a backup plan. I think I need to get with the board. We'll review exactly how that, I don't know exactly what the words are in that review process, but there's steps to that review process. We'll try to roll that out and see what happens. I'm confident it'll be overwhelmingly support this, but we'll go through that review process. Ed said before he left we should go down that road if this is what the group wants. I don't know if this is what the group wants or a handful of people, but we'll go through this exercise anyway.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We appreciate your time. We'll be back in touch.
Believe it or not, I actually have these documents.
Oh, okay, because you were saying you didn't know what it said. But
Well, I don't.
Yeah, there's a whole policy on it.